Good evening. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, Senior Correspondent for Englebrook Independent News, and this is your Federal Crime Report for early August of 2026. Tonight, we're tracking a significant series of cases moving throughout the United States District Court for the District of Columbia and the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. They include guilty pleas stemming from a violent 2023 carjacking and robbery spree, federal convictions against members of Washington Street crew accused of using machine guns to protect a drug trafficking operation, lengthy prison sentence for kidnapping, armed robbery, gun crimes, and homicide, and a major fraud case involving COVID relief money, insurance claims, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer funds. We begin with two Washington men who have now been admitted through their role in a violent crime spree dating back to 2023. Durande Rogers and Hanif Brown, both now 20 years old, both of Washington, D.C., pled guilty to armed carjacking, armed robbery, and related offenses. The plea agreement resolved an extraordinary 87-count indictment. Both men pled guilty to carjacking, armed robbery, possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, and 2 counts of carrying a pistol without a license. Rogers and Brown were only 17 years old when the crime occurred. Prosecutors are requesting 17 years in prison for each defendant on carjacking, armed robbery, and robbery charges. Sentencing is scheduled for September 25th before D.C. Superior Court Judge Jason Park. According to the government's evidence, the spree included an April 7, 2023 incident inside Washington's 3rd Street Tunnel. Rogers and Brown were traveling in a stolen Mercedes when they were rear-ended in a white Jeep. Both defendants then got out of the Mercedes, armed with guns, pointed the weapon at the Jeep's occupant, and demanded they get out. The victim complied. Rogers and Brown took the Jeep and drove away. 9 days later, prosecutors say the pair robbed another victim at gunpoint on 5th Street Northwest, taking the victim's keys and cell phone before escaping with 2 vehicles. Then, shortly after midnight on May 4th, Rogers and Brown robbed 2 more victims on U Street Northwest. This time, the property taken included a necklace, an iPhone, a Louis Vuitton belt, and Rolex valued at approximately $7,000, and an Armor watch valued at approximately $40,000. But investigators would eventually receive more remarkable evidence. According to prosecutors, Rogers posted photos and videos on Instagram showing himself wearing the stolen Armory watch. In the following days, prosecutors say both defendants appeared in additional videos, including music videos, wearing the stolen watches. Their sentencing is now set for September. Next tonight, of the most significant federal organized street gang prosecution in Washington this summer, 4 members of the violent Push That, or PDS, street crew were convicted by a federal jury following a 4-week trial. Marquette Cohen, Christopher Brody, Joshua Stephenson, and Larry Duncan were convicted on charges connected to drug trafficking conspiracy operating in Southeast Washington. The organization distributed marijuana and oxycodone while using firearms, including machine guns, to defend their drug territory. All 4 defendants were convicted of drug trafficking and firearm conspiracies, charged as well with first-degree murder while armed and causing death throughout the use of firearms during drug trafficking offenses. Each faces the possibility of life in federal prison and a mandatory minimum of 30 years for murder. Duncan faces an additional mandatory minimum of 30 years connected to the possession of a machine gun in furtherance of drug trafficking. The murder at the center of the case occurred on May 9th of 2019. According to evidence presented at trial, Duncan supplied a vehicle and sought volunteers to attack rival territory. Stephenson drove Coward and Brody as they searched for a target. They eventually encountered Mark Millen, Jr., who prosecutors say had no affiliation with the street crew. Millen was walking down the street looking at his cell phone when Cohen and Brody opened fire. Prosecutors say Brody chased Millen and continued firing. Millen was struck 13 times and died from his injuries. Federal prosecutors describe a violent culture in which the crew members talked about spinning the block, conducting shooting in rival territory, and even keeping score based upon what injuries were killed. The investigation has now resulted in 30 convictions. Authorities seized approximately 47 firearms, 6 machine guns, more than 1,500 rounds of ammunition, and more than 100 pounds of marijuana, and approximately $581,000 in cash. Sentencing for the 4 defendants are scheduled between November 13th and December 4th. A Washington man will spend more than 9 years in federal prison for an armed kidnapping of a 14-year-old girl. Anton Jones, 24, was sentenced to 114 months in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Jones previously pled guilty to kidnapping while armed. According to court records, Jones and co-defendant Quashawn Johnson confronted the teenager victim in September of 2024 because Johnson believed she knew the location of a missing firearm. Johnson pointed a firearm at the girl's face. Jones then joined him, blocked her escape, and pointed his own firearm at her. The teenager was forced into Jones' vehicle and driven against her will to Johnson's residence in southeast Washington. Police had already been alerted after a witness called 911. Jones ultimately pled guilty, and he will now be serving nearly a decade in federal prison. Now to a major fraud case involving employees of Washington's transit system. Michelle Strofser, 55, of Waldorf, Maryland, has been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for orchestrating a 4-year scheme to defraud AFLAC. Strofser worked as a WMATA train operator. Federal prosecutors said she and other WMATA employees submitted fraudulent disability and health care claims for injuries they never suffered. Strofser fabricated medical records and forged doctor signatures to support the claims. Meanwhile, the employees continued working and collecting their regular WMATA paychecks during periods in which they claimed to be disabled. In return for preparing fraudulent claims, prosecutors say Strofser collected approximately 20% of the insurance payout as kickback. The total losses attributed to her conduct was approximately $362,035.14. Her personal profit was approximately $80,520. She was ordered to repay more than $362,000 and will serve 3 years of supervised release following her prison term. 6 other WMATA employees have pled guilty to related offenses. Condra Bishop, 28, of Washington, has been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for leading a 6-week armed robbery and carjacking spree involving at least 13 incidents across Washington and Maryland. Co-defendant Edward Brown and Khalil Boyd has been sentenced to 12.5 years and 12 years, respectively. The conspiracy stretched from February 14th through March 28th of 2024. The targets included motorists, convenience stores, restaurants, and delivery workers. According to the government evidence, Perkinson and Miller had been confronted outside the Air nightclub shortly after midnight. After Perkins punched Miller, Miller pulled a firearm and fired 9 shots. Perkins was struck as he was attempting to run away and died at the scene. One of the bullets also struck an innocent college student who was leaving a nearby restaurant. She survived. Miller will also serve 5 years of supervised release following the prison term. Another repeat felon has been sentenced in federal court after police recovered a loaded handgun from an unusual hiding place. Michael Ralph Collins, 33, was sentenced to 71 months in federal prison for illegally possessing a loaded Ruger .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Authorities say Collins stashed the firearm inside an open washing machine while fleeing police. His criminal records include attempting burglary and multiple armed robbery convictions. And notably, Collins was also been released from custody less than 2 weeks before committing the latest offense. He will also serve 3 years of supervised release after completing his prison term. Anthony Thomas, 31, another previously convicted felon, has been sentenced to 42 months in federal prison after police recovered a loaded privately manufactured firearm, commonly known as a ghost gun, at a southeast Washington apartment complex. The firearm contained 16 rounds of 9mm ammunition. Police also recovered narcotics and a digital scale. Laboratory testing identified substances including marijuana, hashish, methamphetamine mixed with cocaine and pills, 2 in which tested positive for fentanyl. This marks Thomas' 3rd conviction involving the illegal possession or the use of a handgun. He was on supervised release from an earlier case when the latest offense occurred. A Washington business owner has pled guilty to fraudulently obtaining $1.35 million in COVID-era relief funds. Robert A. Terrell, 51, pled guilty to wire fraud. Terrell owned District Logic LLC and saw Economic Injury Disaster Loan Fund throughout the Small Business Administration. According to court documents, Terrell doctored financial records and wire transferred receipts to make it appear that his company was paid more than $400,000 to creditors when the actual amount was less than $20,000. The false information helped secure additional $1.35 million in federal relief funding. Investigators later determined that some of the money was used for day trading and gambling at casinos. Terrell is scheduled to be sentenced on February 4th of 2027. And tonight, a federal case that extends far beyond the streets of Washington. Avrindell Carranza, 47, a citizen of the Republic of Georgia and former master of tanker Bella 1, has been sentenced to 10 months in federal prison after failing to obey the order of heaved from the United States Coast Guard. According to the government's case, the Bella 1 transported approximately 1.8 million barrels of Iranian origin oil to Asia while Carranza mastered it. Prosecutors say the vessel used techniques designed to obscure its activities, including operating within the automatic identification systems turned off and conceal the vessel's name during a ship-to-ship oil transfer. In December of 2025, the Coast Guard cutter Mariner intercepted Bella 1 while the tanker was heading towards Venezuela. The vessel refused order to stop. What followed was an extraordinary pursuit across the Atlantic. The Coast Guard ultimately assisted the lawful seizure of the tanker on January 7th. He will now be deported after completing his prison sentence. Finally, tonight, a former senior official at the United States Department of Agriculture has been sentenced to prison for abusing his government position in nearly $400,000 fraud scheme. Kirk Perry, 62, a former USDA program director, has been sentenced to 24 months in federal prison. Perry admitted to conspiring with his nephew, Jeremiah Grant, to bill the federal government for work Grant did not actually perform. According to court documents, Perry arranged for the grant to be hired by the companies operated under the contract with the USDA's Office of the Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights. Grant reported direct to Perry. Perry approved invoices billing the government from Grant's proposed work. From August of 2015 throughout November of 2022, prosecutors said the scheme resulted in approximately $399,319 in government payment for work that had not been performed. Perry was ordered to repay the amount and will serve 2 years of supervised release after leaving prison. Violent street crews, armed carjackings, illegal firearms, kidnapping, government fraud, insurance fraud, and a showdown fleet tanker pursued across the Atlantic Ocean. Different defendants, different crimes, different courtrooms, but each of these cases demonstrate the enormous range of criminal matters moving throughout the federal justice system and the courts of the District of Columbia. And several of these investigations also reveal something else. The amount of times required to build major criminal cases, some of the crimes were reported tonight occurred years ago. Investigators collect evidence, prosecutors build their cases, defendants enter guilty pleas or went through juries. And now, in early August of 2026, many of those cases have reached the point in which convictions are being entered and sentences are being imposed. For those already sentenced, the prison terms now begin. For those awaiting sentence, the final decisions rest between the judges will determine the punishment under the law. Englebrook Independent News will continue following these cases, including the upcoming sentencing hearings, and will also bring you the developments of what happens. For Englebrook Independent News, I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Thank you for joining us, and this has been your Federal Crime Report. Don't forget to subscribe. Good night.